Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kyle Hammond. I'm a student, young adult workforce development fellow.
Briefly go over the agenda for today. As you can see, there are more of us here, but those of us who are present for this. So today we're going to go over the funding source for this. We're going to look at who this is particularly aimed at. We're going to look at what makes you eligible, some questions around that. We're going to take some time to look at the application process. Again, we're going to ask for questions you may have. We're going to look at program design, some sample proposals that we think of in terms of this might be great to look at. We'll once again go over our office hours and then discuss some additional funding that we are offering in the equity funding and workforce development pots of money. Next. So the Climate Service Corps came out of the, in October of 2023, Secretary Hopper, Hopper put out the Climate Chief Office recommendations, in which there was included a recommendation for a Climate Service Corps to help meet some of the climate goals for Massachusetts. We are looking to serve participants who are between 18 and 24, hopefully members of an environmental justice community, or anyone else underrepresented in the clean energy workforce, current or former fossil fuel workers who might be transitioning, and federally recognized or state acknowledged tribes. That is the target. This is the Massachusetts map you may use in order to identify what those environmental justice neighborhoods will be in Massachusetts. And so this is who we're targeting in the hopes of growing the pipeline in other areas. Next slide. The Massachusetts Clean Energy Center itself usually focuses on one of four sectors, either large-scale solar, decarbonization, offshore wind, and clean transportation. For this particular RFP, next slide, we are concentrating on that energy efficiency and clean heating and cooling. So we are looking at jobs in the construction trades or pre-apprenticeships. We are looking for energy analysts, auditors, customer service representatives, HVAC techs, installation workers, anyone who really would be in this kind of decarbonization energy efficiency space, specifically around clean heating and cooling. Next slide. So just in case you haven't seen the RFP, this is the slide that kind of will get you there. The QR code is live. The funding is about $800,000 in total. We're going to go over some of these other areas that we're looking at, but this RFP is earned in that planning and implementation grants. For implementation, we are going to require some grading of fundings in order to make sure that this is a really robust program. And again, we continue to want to expand access to climate critical careers in Massachusetts communities. So let's start by talking about who is eligible. If you are a community-based entity, if you are a post-secondary educational institution, if you're a for-profit, your trade association or union, federal or state acknowledged tribes, or workforce development organization, you are eligible to apply as the lead applicant. To that end, one of the things we also encourage people to do is in the chat to share their name, their organization, and their title, so people here may be in contact with you. If maybe you're not one of these entities, but you're looking to connect with someone else who is one of these entities, or you're one of these entities and you're like, as we go through this, you're like, oh, I'm missing that particular kind of company. Where can I find them? So at this moment, I'm going to pause so people can put in the chat a little bit about their company, who they are, their names, and maybe what you might be looking for. So if you put that in chat, or if not now, because you don't want to share, maybe as we're talking. Also important is you need to have a Massachusetts-based office or staffing, and you need to be in good standing. Basically, have pays your taxes in Massachusetts. So that is the eligibility. Again, there is more information on page 9 and 10 of the RFP, and throughout this presentation, you'll see references to the page numbers as a way of helping people get more details. We're going to be doing more of a high level. Here's what you need to know, but there might be some more details in the next slide. Sorry, Kyle, next slide. Yeah. So the grant has two strands. There is an implementation strand and a planning strand. The implementation strand is for 1 to 2 years. We're hoping for matching funds, and that this is really where the goal is deployment. The goal is to really have people come in, train them, and move them either into a career or into another training program to accelerate that career. Applications have to be able to demonstrate a capacity to braid additional relevant funding, and we will talk a little bit more about what kind of funding we're talking about. But the idea being that based on how this is designed, you probably will not have an opportunity, like our money alone might not be enough. You probably need additional funds. And so looking toward that in terms of sustainability. For our planning grants, what we're really looking at is thinking about, well, what does it mean to plan for this, right? Like you might be in a place where you feel like this is a good idea. You have most of these parts. There's some other parts and some other dollars you need in order to make sure you can move this forward, not necessarily this year, but maybe next year. And so that is our second strand. Again, we will do a little more around the details about what these look like in a few moments. There are no fixed per participant costs in the planning, just because I think in a lot of ways this is brand new, so we want to make sure these things are happening the way they should. Is there, moving on, in terms of braiding funds, we are looking to see kind of some established funds, and possibly you might have other private equity funds that you're looking at. So we do ask, like, if you're doing implementation, what are the funds you're going to use to braid this to support the applicants? If you are planning, you don't have to do it, but if it is something you're looking for, we're not going to be braiding funds this year, but we do know in the next year, part of our plan includes applying for. We call out YouthWorks, Job Corps, WIOA, and AmeriCorps specifically on this application, only because these are ones that we know are in line and aligned with the goals of this, but we also understand that there's private funds people might be using and think that this would also help with them. I am also going to take a look at what partnerships will look like. So I think we know that no one entity can do it all. That partnerships do help make it so that students are supported in all sorts of ways. And I say students and training participants, I use them interchangeably because there's a learning aspect and a work aspect. And for some of us, we know you might say, oh, I really need someone to help with the recruiting. Or you might need someone who is a little more in tune with some of the wraparound support services that applicants may need. You might also think to yourself, and you're not going to be the employer. You may, you may be an employer, but thinking about the fact that 18 to 24 is a population in which people may start out with you, but say, you know, I want to do other things. So really thinking about what do I need to make sure that I can meet the outcomes of such a robust program and make sure that people have jobs. And we say what we find with this particular population is people have a tendency to hire, but how do we make sure that our participants stay at those jobs? And so having these partnerships also help with the retention after. So I think at this point, I'm going to pause and ask for questions. In the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask. If not, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague.
Janelle, so I'm sorry, I do have a question. In terms of the funding, are you, has Mass Clean Energy Center considered the reality that a large number of grant funding from the federal government are likely to go away?
So this particular funding is not federal funding. So it's state mandated funding. So we're using funding from ourselves in the state in order to support this particular RFP.
Great, thanks.
Hi, Sam. It looks like you have a raised hand.
Hi, this is Kristen. How are you, Janelle?
Good.
So I hear what you're saying about this being Mass CEC funds, but a lot of those recommended braided funding sources. I mean, we've already been talking with our Workforce Board and Career Center about this, but I'm not unique to them. They're all pretty nervous about what funding looks like for WIOA. There's just so much unknown about that. Just do our best and hope that that funding does not go away if we look at applications and then.
Yeah, I think for us, we're just looking for like what you have, or even that in the next few months you plan on having on board. So it might not be WIOA. You might say, you know, we're going to look at equity funding from Mass CEC. We're going to apply for that. So the idea being, we understand that this might be a multiple funding source. It doesn't have to be one, but what are you as an organization thinking of braiding? And probably during the interview, there might be some questions around that based on where we are, right?
Yeah,
like,
okay.
You know, predict what it's going to look like, but when we get to that bridge, we will ask, like you said, you were going to have WIOA funding.
Yeah.
The landscape changed at all? And if it has, what figuring out what people are doing to be agile
Okay.
in that.
All right.
Very much.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, I'm turning it over to Lauren.
Thanks, Janelle. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk through the logistics of the application process and the timeline before we dive a little deeper into the content of the Climate Service Corps program and expectations there. So you're all here, you're part of this pipeline already, so thank you for signing up and showing up today. Hopefully you've had a chance to check out the RFP and the other documentation on the website. There are a number of forms and attachments that are important to review to fully understand the opportunity and the requirements of the application. This is our informational webinar, which we will be posting a recording and a copy of the slides after the fact on the RFP website. So don't feel the need to be furiously taking notes. You will be able to see this content afterwards. We'll also be holding office hours about this particular funding opportunity, and we'll go over the timing for those in a minute. Those are drop-in times. Feel free to show up and ask any questions you may have. And then we always publish any resources that are shared or questions that are asked on that same RFP site, so everyone has access to the same information. Feel free to contact us at any point if you have questions or either about the application process or the content of the program. The RFP workforce@masscec.com address is the best place to do that, and one of us will get back to you. Again, any of those questions that are being asked or requests for more information will be included in FAQs, so everyone has access to that. And then, assuming that you've gathered all your information, are still interested and feel this is a good fit for your organization, you'll submit all completed forms and attachments to that same email address by the end of the day on the 17th of March. Next slide. So a completed application packet includes a signature and acceptance form, the application itself, a program budget and proposed schedule. And we also include sample grant agreements for you to review. Your responses need to adhere to the instructions that are in each of those forms, including word limits. And that budget form is an Excel file, so it will need to be submitted as such with all of the relevant tabs filled out. Please do not include extra information that's not requested. Any additional attachments will not be considered during our review and scoring process. All right, so here's an overview of the timeline. As I said, questions will be posted after this webinar and then after office hours. You're here today celebrating Valentine's with us at the pre-application webinar. We'll have 3 sessions for office hours, 1 in the early evening, 1 in the early morning, and 1 over lunch. So hopefully one of those will work for your schedule. Proposals are due March 17th. And it is our intent to notify folks of awards 2 to 3 weeks after submission. Next slide. Any questions about logistics around the application? Hopefully pretty straightforward. And again, if things come up as you're starting to review those documents, you're always welcome to reach out. Okay, next. So what makes a successful application? What are the expectations? A successful application for this opportunity will have a specific occupational focus. As Janelle mentioned, this funding opportunity is narrower than clean energy in general. We're focusing specifically on energy efficiency, clean heating and cooling. It will have a defined and targeted living wage. Transparent career fit counseling. We'll go into some of these program elements in a little more detail in a moment, but it is an expectation that participants be receiving career counseling throughout their term of service. Designed and delivered quality training, which would be on both technical topics in the field and more general workforce topics. A plan to address any barriers that may impede folks from completing their term or enrolling in any off-ramps at the end. Skill development and designing for success. Next slide. So here I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the program design elements. As Janelle mentioned, there are 2 strands for this funding opportunity. Strand A is implementation and strand B is planning. So for the moment, we're just going to be talking about implementation. And then we'll go into more detail on planning. So for strand A implementation, a reminder that the maximum award is $375,000 and there is that braided funding requirement. The expectation is that any proposals for this strand, would propose a program of at least 20 weeks. And that would include orientation, training, work-based learning, and service experiences. It's also a requirement that alumni services be available for at least 1 year after program completion. We know this is important for the retention and success of program participants in the field after the fact. Jumping into recruitment, assessment, and onboarding. As an applicant, there would be a coordination of all the administrative and fiscal processes. You would likely be leading recruitment, possibly also partnering with others on recruitment and outreach as one of those established partnerships that Janelle mentioned. There would be service site orientation and training. So both for program participants to know what they need to know to be successful at their site, but also for those who are supervising program participants and working with them at that site so they can ensure a quality participant experience. There would be some sort of evaluation of participant applications and a selection, articulated selection process and onboarding. There would be durable skill development and coaching. This is what I just referenced a moment ago, training and coaching work that will prepare core participants for work-based learning at their site. Career readiness skill training, career advising, and coaching and case management is an expectation to be provided consistently throughout the entirety of the experience and for that alumni period after the fact. Next. There should also be some element of industry aligned skill development. Some of that may be a more standard universal training on clean energy career awareness, but also more occupation specific training for those occupations that we talked about. There are some examples listed there. By no means is that an exhaustive list, and you may have other ideas or suggestions of what you'd like to include there. But hopefully that will give you a jumping off point to at least start thinking about what some of those industry skills might be that you would like to include. And then a large portion of the program and participants' time would be climate service and work-based learning. So that would be paid or stipend supported work-based learning. And service learning experiences that are focused on specific local climate challenges in this industry, energy efficiency and clean heating and cooling. In the RFP and earlier in the slides, we had sort of an outline of what some of those roles might be and what some of that work may look like. So this sounds specific, but also it's relatively expansive when you start drilling into what could possibly be included. Placement, enrollment, and next step planning. So there should be individual and group opportunities throughout the term to reflect on the core experience, examine what strengths or challenges they're identifying in their skills and their experience on site, what some future career plans may be, the opportunity to connect with employers in that industry, and connections to further training or jobs. Again, there is an explicit expectation that there be that 12-month of post-term period with follow-up services provided. Next. So for this strand, for implementation, some outcomes may include successful community recruitment, comprehensive wraparound services, impactful skills-based training, and then participants entering training programs, apprenticeships, or obtaining employment in a climate critical occupation. We have some metrics listed here as well that maybe some of the things you would track to reflect those outcomes. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, and there's many other things we could possibly include here, just a jumping off point to get you started. All right. So what would this look like if you were to run a Strand A program? This is an example. Again, just an example, not a prescription by any means. There are many different ways this could look. But one may be a MassHire Workforce Board that's applying to expand YouthWorks programming to include climate service core experiences. In that situation, they may propose to build on existing summer work-based learning specific to energy efficiency and provide those technical skills, service experience, and placement at the end of the term. All right. So that's implementation. And we're going to talk about planning just a little bit, and then we'll have time for questions in just a few minutes. So again, Strand B is planning. The awards for the planning strand are $30,000 to $50,000, and that braided funding is recommended but not required. So the requirements for a planning grant under this this funding opportunity are goal alignment. It should be clear from your application that the planning that you would conduct would align with the goals of the Climate Service Corps program, that you'd be spending your grant period getting ready to launch a program that aligns with those requirements, and that you are planning on including those required components that we just talked about. So even if you're not applying for implementation, it's good to review that information and understand what those requirements are so you can reflect that in your planning process. Planning grants also need to speak to a demonstrated need and have a clear increased capability, plan and execute that would be possible with this increased support. Next. So for planning grants, you know, the outcomes and metrics are slightly different since you won't have active participants in your program. But the real goal is to be ready to successfully implement a program and likely applying for implementation support. Braided funding, again, is an expectation in that implementation phase. So working towards that and planning for those intentional wraparound services. Some metrics there include program planning, MOUs for established partnerships with trainers or others, curriculum, secured funding, etc. All right. And here's an example of that, that strand B planning applicant. A nonprofit organization with experience in environmentally focused service learning and that has established community partnership applies to plan a Climate Service Corps program. Their plan is to braid AmeriCorps and Mass CEC funding to offer a program with clear pathways. And so this support would allow them to prepare those applications and develop the resources necessary to have a competitive application in both those processes. Next. Okay, do we want to pause for questions, Janelle, before you hop in on budgets?
I see you raise hand.
Yeah, okay. Sam?
Hey there. I've got actually two questions. One is, it sounds to me like this is a combination of what we think of as career awareness activities, but also some lower level short-term training, such as a weatherization tech. Is that correct?
Yes, so there likely will be a combination of both. Some of that more general career awareness in the clean energy space, and then the more technical skill development that would be necessary for the term and the activities they'd be completing in things like weatherization.
Great. And my other question is there anything planned to give the trainees through this program a sense of belonging or broader community because they are members of the Climate Service Corps for the Commonwealth? Like in our own training programs, we have a community of practice, but I'm wondering if trainees in this program will ever have a convening or feel like they're really part of something in that way.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the answer is yes, but what that looks like is a little TBD. As the one who's likely working with all of this, I can tell you it's certainly something I've been thinking about. But what that looks like in terms of in-person, virtual opportunities, you know, what it would consist of is still to be determined, but it is certainly the intent to have this be implemented on a local level, but connected to sort of the statewide initiative. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Kim?
Good afternoon. So the planning grant if you were to apply for the planning grant, the $30,000 to $50,000, do you know when the next round of funding is for the implementation grant? So we could plan accordingly?
Janelle or Jennifer, do you want to?
I was gonna unmute and I realized with the change I wasn't muted. So I think with the way we think about this is it would either come from state funding for the next round, which we all know that the budget is coming and will be out shortly, and then there's all that lovely debate, or it will be from some of our other Mass EC funding. So I think the idea is hopefully in the next year, we would be able to stand up funding another round of implementation.
So can I do a follow-up question? So is there a scenario where someone might apply for both at the same time? Well, I guess that wouldn't make sense, would it? To apply for a planning grant and an implementation grant? Because it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily sound like you might have the next round of funding.
Well, we
Yeah, I
actually, this funding source is actually secured. So this funding source is coming up,
Okay,
Mass Save
thanks,
Equity
Jennifer.
Workforce Funding. And there is a 3-year commitment to that funding in the Mass Save plan. And this is within the scope of services for young adults within that we're offering relative to that funding. So the exact timeline of the next RFP release is to be determined. It could be as early as, end of summer, but more likely fall. But it isn't a
Okay.
question as to whether or not that portion of the funding is secure.
It's when. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thank you.
Is I'll move on to budgeting. So for this particular grant, we do ask that budgets are complete, that they are clear, they're tied to narratives that explain what the costs are for. There are separate budget tabs when you open this for if you're doing strand A or strand B. We ask that people take a look and make sure that they are using the appropriate Excel sheets for the strand they're applying to. We are hoping that if there is different fringe and indirect, that those are also things that are explained in the budget. Budgets should include anything that we think of as being useful for this. What is your staff time? You're probably going to have to do some marketing. You might be looking into subcontractors. You might have to purchase some equipment. We're looking into some leasing a venue space to deliver this. You may be doing training stipends or uniforms for the grantee, for the participants in order to make sure that they have the things they need. So we are looking for budgets that consider and think about what the needs would be of the participants in this program and also of the program in order to make sure that this is successful in meeting outcomes. There are certain things that we are not willing to, at this time, put into budgets. Next slide. And those things include things such as purchasing venue space for your general operating purposes. If you hire a grant writer in order to prepare this, or anything that happens before or following the contract. So those are kind of things we are not going to pay for out of this. I think if there are no questions about budgets, we're going to move on to the next slide. I think are selection criteria. So what are the things that Mass EC is looking for when we look at a program? Some of the things we're going to be looking at are experience and qualifications. We want to make sure that these are whoever your particular program targets. It is a population you've worked for or have enough support services that are necessary for that program. We look at who and what occupations you're using. As Lauren has stated, this is a very heating and cooling is what we're looking at. And so we are hoping people deliver heating and cooling. If there is a conversation that's like, we're also going to braid fundings because we feel like this is similar in the beginning. I think we're open to that kind of thing, but we are looking for the most part for this to be aimed at the occupation that we are looking at. We're looking for wraparound and post-placement retention support. Definitely at least some conversation about how those things are going to be done. It's great if no one ever needs wraparound support, but we also know you always have to plan for it. And then making sure that you are in a place where you are really looking at all the things that are out there and using what we can use in the field, as well as resources and technical assistance. Some additional selection criteria. Sorry, next slide. Outcome, budget, leverage, resources, and sustainability. One of the things we will be considering is how will this program continue? If it's an implementation, we are looking for braided funding, and so we will need to see that in your application if this is a strand A. But one of the things that we often look at is it just our money that's going to sustain this? Because if it is, then we want you to look outside of just us. Where else can these happen? Metrics and outcomes for strand A are very important. The ability to do so, especially we know that for this particular population, there may be some additional challenges. So really thinking through what this would look like in order to get that retention in. And then for strand B, we're looking to see how you plan for the impact of the program. What are the things that you are going to look at in order to make sure that this program is impactful? Next slide. So the next steps here for us would be come to office hours. We are not going to answer every single question here. You may have questions that come up as you're moving forward. We have, as Lauren pointed out, we have 3 separate office hours. We tried to make a spread of times in order to allow different people to access this at different times. Contact us with any questions, and then we will also be doing printing frequently asked questions. I think it's like next week, and then we will also be doing it again a little further closer to the date. RFPs for this are due on March 17th. I think the next slide. We're going to take questions in one moment. I actually want to just look at some additional funding, and I want to make sure that people can get the questions. So if we're looking at additional funding, this slide talks about some of the other opportunities we have. The green is from the state fundings, and that is the Climate Critical Workforce Training Equipment and Infrastructure Grant, which is actually open now. The next date, that's the priority date on this, is May 2nd. And then the blues are all the equity funding. So there's an equity workforce training for job seekers and adults that it has a date of March 2nd. The Planning and Capacity Grant, which it's rolling, and May 29th, February 28th is the next priority date. And then what is now being called this is the old name, but it is basically for underrepresented businesses, and that is opening relatively soon. We hope to see that open soon. So if you are working on the hub and spoke model for businesses. So I believe I'm going to turn it over to Cassia to talk about the internship opportunities.
Yeah, so just wanted to pub quickly that our summer session for our internship program is now opened. And this is just our standard college and grad student, as well as open to training program students as well. But essentially employers can apply for up to $8,640 per intern for the summer. So yeah, if you're looking for a summer intern, encourage you to scan the QR code and tap into that dedicated workforce. And then the next one I have to pub is our technical trades work and learning program, which is specifically targeted at vocational high school, after dark, and CTI students. And this is for more technical focused jobs. But that's open right now, and our current session runs through the end of the summer. And that amount of funding is the same, so $8,640 per participant.
I think at this time, we will pull down the slides. So if anyone has any additional questions, of course, there are also other ways in which to contact us if you do have questions. And I think we're going to stop the recording at this time as well.